next subject, fighting erosion, and the natural shoreline protection project that's going on at Cornell, and what it means. So I'm going to ask Joyce if she'll lead off on this. What is natural shoreline protection? And tell us about the project that you sponsored. Thank you.
Okay. Natural shoreline protection, or living shorelines, are projects that involve an alternative to bulkheading shoreline properties. They can be a combination of what we call hard and natural defenses. We are currently carrying out 2 such projects in the town of Southold, one in Widow's Hole in Greenport and one at the Suffolk County Environmental Learning Center, Marine Environmental Learning Center, both of which involve wetland plantings, and one of which also involves the use of ribbed mussels to both stabilize the shoreline and assist with cleaning the water. And they're projects that we'd like to see expanded both to public and private properties. And so with the state of New York, we're kind of looking for other places to expand this idea. Living shoreline projects are what we call a tool in the toolbox of coastal resiliency. They're not going to solve every problem, but are a good alternative to complete hardening of the shoreline. And on the North Fork of Long Island, we've seen between a 3 and 4 times hardening of the shoreline with linear feet of bulkhead since 2001. And this is a troubling number for us, in part because of the habitat destruction, but also in part from a coastal resiliency standpoint. Water and sediment need a place to go, and oftentimes complete bulkheading can cause other problems. So we're looking into different combinations of alternatives around the East End.
I just think it's something that trustees are probably very active in and interested in, and I saw the project at Widow's Hole. It was very impressive, and something that everyone can go and take a look at. It's better to have these projects that people can, demonstration projects, because then as a homeowner, you're gonna get a good feel if you can walk through it and take a look at it.
Yeah, and to be clear, the project at Widow's Hole, Peconic Estuary program funded. The Peconic Land Trust owns the property, and we have Steve Schott from Cornell Cooperative Extension who designed and carried out the plan. If you'd like to talk a little bit about the grasses and the structures there, I'd be grateful.
I got a big mouth. Hi, I'm Steve Schott with Cornell Cooperative Extension, Habitat Restoration Specialist. So the project with Widow's Hole, for those of you who are familiar with Greenport, it used to be the old ExxonMobil depot. It was a commercial industrial property. The shoreline had a pier, had a lot of oil barges over almost 100 years of operation that would come in and out. So the shoreline was pretty heavily degraded. After Sandy, there was significant erosion into the upland portions of the preserve, Widow's Hole Preserve, and the land trusts had approached Cornell to help them come up with a management plan to help protect the shoreline, which would not include using hardened structures like bulkheading. This is the Living Shorelines guidance was passed by New York State in March 2018, I believe. Someplace around there. New York is behind most of the eastern coast with coming up with and using these living shoreline techniques. As Joyce had mentioned, they're not always appropriate depending on the sites. Sometimes hardened shorelines, rock revetments and things, especially in high energy locations, are more appropriate, would be more resilient. But in many cases, our creeks and some of our sheltered bays and shorelines, these offer a lower cost, higher environmental and ecological value, and a lot of people find them a lot more aesthetically pleasing alternative to putting up a bulkhead. So at Widow's Hole, it was a twofold issue. About 2,000 yards of clean sand fill was brought in. The beach was regraded. We created a coastal dune to protect the upland. That was planted with American beach grass. And then we also provided or installed marsh fringe with smooth cord grass, known as Spartina alterniflora. It's your normal marsh grass you see in all your creeks. So the combination, and then also a cobble band in front of the marsh grass on the shore end adds more of a natural but not a large boulder wall to help with resiliency to wave action. That was modeled off of a few sites in Southold Town where natural marshes and very open, exposed, wave-exposed areas are doing very well. They seem to have these really rocky sediments along their offshore face that absorb these wave forces and don't erode out as easily as, say, sand or silt. The project is open, the site is open to the public. Go to the end of 4th Street in Greenport. You can walk right around to, what's the side street? Carpenter? Anyway, if you go down to the end of 4th Street, just walk around, there's a loop you can do. Actually, there's no fencing around the preserve at this point, so you can walk right to the top of the dune. We have fencing to protect the dune vegetation, and then we have string fencing to prevent waterfowl from grazing on our salt marsh plants until they become established. But the site is totally accessible. You can walk out there and see it. The Shoreline Demonstration Project is a combined project with Southold Town trustees, received money, as well as PEP. So it was a combined project. This is being conducted in Man-Made Canal at Cedar Beach County Park, where Cornell has their marine lab. We have different plots that are looking to use different materials to provide structure and protection, and then those are also coupled with natural plantings of marsh grass behind these structures. So we're using core fiber logs, which are coconut fiber that are put into these hemp mesh bags. They look like long sausages. These are more of a temporary short term. So if you were doing work on your shoreline and you just need to stabilize it for a few years, this is the technique you would use. They slowly rot away, and the plants can move into the area where they are, but it does provide some erosion protection in the short run. We're using shell bags. We produce shellfish at our lab. We have a lot of shell. They can go into biodegradable bags, and you can stack these bags and make small walls. So we have an area of 60 feet that will have a 1 foot high wall in front of it with the plants planted right up to the back of it. So the shell bags will eventually break down, but the shell, you almost make like an oyster reef in front of it. And you can get recruitment of rib mussels and oysters if they're available in the area to those, which will eventually help stabilize that material. But that provides a nice natural hardened structure. We will be using rock. Rock is used all over the East End and pretty much the entire Atlantic seaboard for stabilization. Being we're in a little quiet canal, we propose to use smaller rock, but if you're at, say, Orient Point, you're going to want big rock. So these are things that are engineering issues based on how exposed your site is. The trustees asked us, we're using what I guess commercial terms would be surge stone. It's that angular bluestone will be most of that rock. And it's only, again, going to be about a footprint of about 2 to 3 feet wide at the base. You're going to stack it up, and it'll be about a foot and a half high. Again, you'll have the plants planted right up to it behind it. That'll provide the wave break that you need, and also as any kind of sand moves, it'll get caught in the rock crevices and actually make that rock wall more stable. Yep.
Do you guys provide consulting, or if I wanted to have you give me a plan that I wanted to implement something like that, do we come to you? Who do we go to?
We can consult. We cannot, I am not an engineer. I am not an architect. I cannot sign off on plans. I can look at a plan that, say, your client puts together or has a professional put together and tell you, best practices if it'll work in your location, make recommendations. Cornell cannot, due to our charter, come out and actually do these projects for private homeowners because we are not meant to compete with commercial entities. But we are an educational facility, we will most certainly come out and give you our best assessment of what would work in your case.
And I'd just like to add to that, there are a handful of homeowners that are initiating projects like this at their own cost. One of the end products of these demonstration projects is the production of guidance documents. And now the state has sort of started this process. We're working with Sea Grant to that end as well. So it's evolving, and Cornell will be assisting us with some education, outreach and information about these current sites. But that is the long-term goal for this organization, is to also create a pamphlet, a document, guidance for homeowners to be able to follow. There are, again, it's just starting to come about, so there are some landscapers and landscape architects that can assist you with that, and we can help you find them. And I can't actually speak to cost, but I would imagine at this point it's relatively expensive because it's so new. But I don't know. But those conversations we can certainly help you have.
So Steve, when is your demo center going to be open to the public?
We should have everything, weather permitting and all things going well, in place structure-wise and planted by the end of August. We're also working on educational material that'll be posted above each one of the treatment centers. So because it is Cedar Beach is a county park, the area is not fenced off. It's accessible to the public. The trustees have expressed interest in being able to direct people coming before them for these types of projects to be able to go down there. So we'll have information for at each site, treatment area as we're calling them, explaining what the process is and how it could be modified depending on how much wave action you have or how steep the grade is or things to that effect. And then this way it gives you kind of a self-guided tour if you don't have the ability to get in during the week when we're there, or contact us, or you just want to get an idea first while you're delving into this. We're always available. The center's open from 8 to 5 during the week, and you can go online and get our emails, and anyone has questions, definitely come forward. One point about doing living shorelines with cost, I don't know the cost either, but for anybody who had bulkheads replaced after Sandy, I was told somewhere around the line about $1,500 per 10 feet or something like that.
$100 a foot. $100 a foot?
Okay. Okay, so yeah, it was close. I guess it varies on the contractor. So from our estimated costs, we're not seeing it to be that expensive. We haven't done a cost analysis because we're providing a lot of our own materials. We grow our own plants. The core fiber logs were a donation. The rock is the only thing right now that we've paid for. The shell, again, we've had ourselves. So, but I would say that the cost per foot is going to be a lot less than right now.
Do you provide the shell bags if people need?
No, we'll provide you with the vendor that we use. Most of the time, the shell bags that we're using are used for making oyster reefs. That's one of our other program areas. We just took advantage of having that resource and using it in that way. There have been people locally that have been interested in using shell and cages to potentially, that's more of a long-term, because those cages won't break down probably for 20, 30 years. And again, it all comes down to what DEC will allow. But the living shoreline concept is gaining traction. They have passed their guidance, so they are considering these more than they have in the past. So the process should get easier as we go.
Steve, would you just mention the permit process, like what do you?
It's a typical wetland permit. So if you're in the town of Southold, you have to put in, it's a joint wetland application, goes to Army Corps, Department of State, Office of General Services, and DEC. And then you also have to submit a permit to Southold Town trustees as well. So it is quite the bureaucracy. In some cases, some of the agencies work pretty quickly. Their scope and their jurisdiction in the process is minimal. Just whether or not it's kind of okay with the general policy of the state as far as the Department of State goes. Army Corps and DC get into the more environmental and impact issues to coastal waters. And it's a reasonable process to go through because depending on how much disturbance in the area, first of all, living shoreline is not going to be appropriate for every area. So they try to limit, the permitting process helps limit projects to those that will succeed at the site that they're being proposed for. You don't want to go in there and have to do multiple different events of disturbing the shoreline. You want to get it right the first time because all you're doing is making your situation worse every time you have to remove what you just did because it didn't work the first time. So it is an onerous process, but there's a reason why it's there.
What's the role of the LWRP in getting
So the LWRP comes into consistency with the state. So there's the state has their own consistency for coastal waters, and then the towns have their own LWRPs. The state, Department of State's aspect in the joint application requires that you show, based on points within the LWRP and the state's coastal management plan, that your project meets the standards set forth.
So how would a permit be granted if it was against recommendation on LWR?
That's a good question. I don't know.
I'm going to bring that to you later.
I don't know yet, because there's all different levels. So it could be rejected at the town level, which is the final. So usually you start with the joint application and get all the higher ups. They're very general in their acceptance. The town is the final, really the final say, because they are the most specific and most focused on that application in Southold Town. But and I don't know if they tell you that they don't want it. I don't know necessarily how you can. It's not easy to change their mind.
I don't know.
For me, or okay, I'm going to pass this back on.
Thank you.
So, it seems to me, from the Senate point of view, it would be best to go put it before the town first, before we go through the legal fees associated with the processing through DEC, because we know how DEC is.
Well, typically, as far as from the town's perspective, we're the least onerous task that you have. You gotta go through the DEC, Army Corps and all that. There was a code in Southold Town that there's no new bulkheads in the bay or the creeks. So these living shorelines, rock revetments, anything that is not hardening the shoreline, but at the same time protects your property, protects the environment, we're all for. We try to streamline that as much as possible. And back to the LWRP, as part of our permitting process, we have to bring an application into consistency with the LWRP in order to approve it. And that takes on many forms depending on the LWRP report that we get. Sometimes, like for instance, if it's a bulkhead or a dock that was built prior to a permit, it'll be inconsistent with the LWRP because that structure does not have a permit. So by us granting a permit for a replacement or for that dock brings it into consistency with that report, so therefore we can grant the permit.
So can I bring you something that I'm looking for answers for? I haven't received an answer. Can I bring this to you afterwards?
Yeah, sure.
We have within our saltwater marshes lots of marsh islands, small islands that are just naturally habitated with grasses that are degrading, have been degrading over the years. And I would encourage both local, county, and state agencies to support applications for grants to replant these islands so that the marsh is recreated there, and it's great for the environment. Some of these islands are located immediately adjacent to channels that were dredged way back in the 60s and 70s There was a very successful program done, I believe, the Jamaica Bay area, where these channels were dredged the material, which normally it costs a lot of money and is very complicated to get rid of. But that material was just sprayed onto these islands. Then these islands were vegetated with natural vegetations, and they've flourished. So it was a win-win. The DEC strongly supported these programs, and this is like 10 years ago. So again, I would encourage the local, county, and state regulatory agencies to look at encouraging these activities, particularly when there's grant applications applied for.
Well, there's actually a project going on with Cornell Co-op down in Cedar Creek. So the county's dredging Cedar Creek this fall, and as part of that, they're collecting the sand from that dredge project to use in conjunction with the Cornell to build the marsh back in that area. So it is a great project. You're absolutely right, and we look to hopefully expand that going forward.
Yeah, I know, like in particular in James Creek, there's some of these islands that are owned by the county. So there's one hurdle already removed. It's owned by the county, not by private ownership or whatever. I think the same thing in Mattatuck Creek. So again, those hurdles are removed right away as far as ownership.
I would just like to add to that the Estuary program keeps a list that's updated annual of priority sites and projects. And if you have very specific areas like that, that you can reach out to us, and we can incorporate it through our technical advisory committee to be included if it's not already there. And that while this is a great idea, and we're also involved in the Cedar Beach project, what is in that dredged materials often sometimes limits what we can do, and the DEC has a heavy hand in that. But absolutely, anytime we can create, accretion with sediment for wetland islands that are drowning or otherwise degraded, we would prioritize. So that's all on our website, our priority places, and if you don't see what you're talking about there, please reach out.
Just want to add real quick. So the reason that we're seeing fewer and fewer of these islands is because they're, as Joyce just said, they're drowning. We've changed how the silt and sand is deposited naturally in these creeks by playing around sometimes with how we decided we wanted to channelize the creeks. So you're not getting that natural sediment building up, which helps these marshes keep up with sea level rise. And the fact that sea level rise is rising faster than we're getting natural accretion rates. So one of the things in Jamaica Bay that they're doing with the spray is they're using that to actually increase the accretion rate so that the marshes that are there can actually keep up with the sea level rise. These little marsh islands, we don't have priority for them because they're little. Most of them were created because of the dredging of those channels initially, and they have no new sediment budget to help keep up. So, like the one in Mattatuck Creek, I know exactly where you're talking about. I think you've spoken with Chris Pickrell about.
Yeah.
That's our issue. We've gone out and looked at that. It just doesn't have the sediment where it's located, the accretion to keep up with sea level rise. And those plants have to be, the marsh plants have to be out of the water almost 12 hours a day. They are wetland plants, but they can only keep their feet wet so long before they start to drown. And you're talking millimeters can make a difference between whether the marsh survives or not. So, but this is something that we need to start considering in Suffolk County and the Peconic Estuary. How can we help some of these places with projects like figuring out, can we do this spraying every few years with dredge spoils even? There's talk about that with our Cedar Beach project, with the marsh we're going to recreate there.
One of the things we've done too, which we will release before the end of the year, is what we're calling a critical land protection strategy, which specifically takes into consideration marsh migration and areas of drowning marsh. So all of these things, again, are parts of this larger how we combat or how we adapt to climate change and what we need to do to protect those wetland areas.
I'd like to commend Joyce and her organization, PEP, for getting the funding for doing some of these projects. And we're looking forward to many, many more, Joyce. Thank you, and good work.